Meet the world's angriest walking hurricane bolters. They're very, very slowly coming to get you. Hello again and welcome back to Auspex Tactics for another Space Marine unit review. Today we're talking about everyone's favourite Space Marines inside a Space Marine, and we're talking about Centurions, specifically Assault Centurions, who just got an absolutely horrendous points drop in the new Codex, enough in my mind to make them a legitimately scary threat on the battlefield. Now these are the Space Marines that are clad in an exosuit and toting enormous siege drills. In this video we'll have a chat about the rules for these hulking warriors, look over their options, which armies they work best in, and how I would personally run them on the tabletop. So in the background, the Centurions' Exo-Armor is a relatively recent addition to the Space Marines' armoury. The Assault Centurions tend to be deployed where the enemy is very well dug in and you need a lot of force and muscle contained in a very small space that's too small for, say, dreadnoughts or tanks to be deployed in. Just looking at those enormous drills, I don't really fancy being caught in too close proximity to them. So without further ado, let's get into the rules. Now, Assault Centurions are an elite's choice for the new Space Marine Codex. In a base size squad you get 1 Sergeant and 2 Marines, and you can choose to include up to another 3 other Marines for a 6 Centurion unit. Each model costs 42 points if you give it auto launchers, or 52 points if you give them hurricane bolters, which frankly I would. They will also cost a little bit more if you choose to give them melter guns, but we'll go over that later. The Assault Centurions have a fairly beefy stat line with a movement of 4, weapon skill and ballistic skill 3, strength and toughness of 5, 4 wounds, 3 attacks, leadership 7 and a 2-up save. The Sergeant gets an additional attack, so 4 attacks, and an additional leadership, making him leadership 8. Now this is a pretty decent improvement on the last Codex, because there used to be only 3 wounds and 2 attacks base, so they're considerably more lethal than they were before, and also more durable. They're even more lethal because they've now gained the Shock Assault rule, so each of these little monsters will have 4 attacks when they're going into the charge. Each Centurion is armed with 2 Flamers, Centurion siege drills, and either assault launchers or hurricane bolters, as I mentioned before. The assault launchers give you the chance to inflict a mortal wound on a unit you've just charged, so for each Centurion with assault launchers within an inch of that unit, you have the chance to inflict a mortal wound on a roll of 4+. The hurricane bolters, however, will give you a rapid-fire 6 weapon at strength 4, damage 1, 24 inches. And because these guys are Centurions, they will always have the bolter discipline rule in effect, so they will always be getting 12 shots at 24-inch range, which is just frankly phenomenal. It's the same damage output as 6 Tactical Marines, whereas these guys only cost 52 points with hurricane bolters, and the 6 Tactical Marines cost 72 points. That's not bad at all, considering the Assault Centurion also has significantly better melee, and also has 2 Flamers. Speaking of that melee, their siege drills are basically like Thunderhammers with none of the downsides and AP-4. They're a melee weapon at strength times 2, so that's strength 10 because they're strength 5 base, and AP-4 and damage 3. As I said, each model will get 4 attacks with this due to Shock Assault, so if you do manage to get a full squad of these to charge, say, an Imperial Knight, they will do on average 33 damage to that Knight, happily killing it. So these guys are obviously going to go through any hard target in the game like butter, and will put a decent amount of damage in hordes as well, as a full squad will have 25 attacks on the charge. And all of this is just for 312 points. This incredible melee capability is why I don't really think the assault launchers are worth it. You're only just adding a little bit of extra damage to an already awesome assault, whereas you could give the unit incredible shooting firepower for just 10 points extra. So I'd always advocate taking the hurricane bolters. Now, as I mentioned before, their other option is to take a pair of melter guns instead of their pair of flamers. This will cost you an extra 16 points compared with just having the 2 flamers, putting an Assault Centurion with melter guns and hurricane bolter at 68 points per model. My personal opinion is that the melter guns probably aren't worth it, because if you're already within 12-inch range of something, you're likely going to be able to charge it and kill it if it's a hard target. I wouldn't say they're a bad choice per se, if you can deliver them into short range, but I feel like you'd be better off saving the points and just buying more very cheap Assault Centurions with Hurricane Bolters and Flamers. Now they have a few special rules as well. They have the Angels of Death special rule, which as I mentioned allows them to use the Bolter Discipline rule all the time. It will give them Combat Doctrines, which is very big. This means that when they're in the Tactical Doctrine, all of those Flamer hits and all of those Hurricane Bolter hits get AP -1. Now, don't get me wrong, the Hurricane Bolter is already a ridiculously good weapon, even with no AP, but this just lets it put the hurt on pretty much anything in the game. Against, say, Marines in cover, this doubles the effectiveness of the Hurricane Bolter, and makes it a very much all-purpose weapon rather than just an anti-horde weapon. And Angels of Death also gives them Shock Assault, which again we've previously mentioned. Now you can just ignore what I said about Space Marines in cover, because it turns out the Sergeant has an Omniscope, which allows the entire unit to ignore cover anyway. So while he's alive, those Space Marines won't be getting any cover at all, and if their Hurricane Bolters at -1, they'll only be saving on 4-ups rather than their usual 2-up when you're using these very nice Hurricane Bolters. Apologies for that, I thought it was only the Devastator Centurions that got the Omniscope, but apparently it's these guys as well. That makes them even better. And finally, the unit has the Combat Squads ability, so if you have a unit of 6, you can split them into units of 3 before the battle starts. So now we've gone over the stats, let's have a look at the ways that we can boost these guys' damage output. The primary problem with the Assault Centurions is their range. They basically need to be as close as possible to the enemy to put the hurt on them, but they only have a movement of 4. This means that anything that you can do to get them to set up closer to the enemy, or have an extra move, or be able to advance and charge, anything like that, can be incredibly useful on these guys, and should be the primary thing that you're considering when you're picking what chapter or successor chapter to build them from. The top pick for me for Assault Centurions is by far Raven Guard, for several reasons. Firstly, they have a Warlord trait called Master of Ambush, which can allow a Raven Guard character and the Assault Centurions to set up within 9 inches of the enemy at the start of the first battle round after you know who's going first. This is just hilariously nuts, as you'll be able to fire with a whole bunch of Flamer shots, a whole bunch of Hurricane Bolter shots, and then also potentially get a first turn charge, and you should actually be able to kill a sizable portion of the enemy's army right on turn 1. Raven Guard also have a stratagem that allows you to put a unit in Deep Strike Reserve, allowing them to come on 9 inches from enemy units through the battle. So if you don't have first turn, you can put your big unit of Assault Centurions in reserve for 1 CP, ready to fire a full round of Hurricane Bolter shots and then hopefully charge the enemy. Now both of those are hilariously strong, but you can make this even stronger by taking a Raven Guard successor chapter that still gives you access to all of those nice stratagems and warlord traits, but you can further improve the Centurion squad with this. If you take a Raven Guard successor with the long-ranged marksman and hungry for battle traits, then they just get even better. Long-ranged marksman will affect their flamers, allowing you to have 11-inch range flamers. 11-inch range is very good to have on flamers because it's bigger than the 9 inches that they've got to set up away when they come in from reserve. That means that when they drop in, they can fire all of their flamers against the nearest enemy unit, which will, for a full squad of 6, average 42 hits with flamers, usually at AP -1, because when they come in from reserve it will be the second battle round. That's a ludicrous amount of damage, it will munch through hordes, and it can even put on a surprising amount of hurt on hard targets. Say if you drop them next to an Eldar flyer, which usually has a lot of survivability because of the hit modifiers, you on average do 7 wounds to it because of the AP -1 and the auto hitting. Now the second part, the hungry for battle traits, would allow you to have +1 to your charges, so they set up 9 inches away, so they only need an 8-inch charge, which with a command point reroll gives you a very reasonable chance of getting in straight from the charge with no other buffs. As we've already discussed, making the charge or not making the charge could be the difference between you one-shotting a knight with ease, so any little bonuses that you can get to make the charge more easy are quite nice to have. So that's my optimal build. There's still quite a lot of other chapters that can make good use of the Assault Centurions. White Scars also have a stratagem to allow a unit to outflank, so that can get them really close to the enemy and come in turn 2 and do a similar tactic, but of course you're limited to being near the board edges. Being able to advance and charge is also quite useful for Centurions, as being able to make contact with a unit a surprising amount of distance away could allow you to kill a hard target your opponent isn't expecting. Ultramarines aren't too bad for fallback and being able to shoot, because these guys have a massive amount of firepower with those flamers and hurricane bolters. Imperial and Crimson Fists are also very good because of their bolter buff, which will give your hurricane bolters an extra 25% more hits, as they get multiple hits from every 6. Iron Hands also aren't terrible because boosted Overwatch is great. A 6-up Feel No Pain is good for large multi-wound models, and also they could combo well with Iron Father Fyros, giving them a 5-up invul save and also letting them hit on 2s. So plenty of good units that you can use to maximise these guys' effectiveness on the battlefield. There's a few stratagems to consider when using these guys. Auspex Scan is a good one to keep in mind, as it could let you unleash 72 hurricane bolter shots on the enemy. Honor the Chapter 3 CP to fight again is definitely worth remembering because they have such a high damage output. You could destroy one hard target and then be ready to smash the next with your second fight action. And my last pick is Transhuman Physiology for 2 CP, for if your opponent turns a lot of heavy weapons on this squad, then they will never wound them on better than a 4-up. So with all of that being said, how would I run them on the battlefield? Firstly, as I've said, if you can, keep them in reserve to set them up very close to the enemy lines, and that's certainly an option. If you're against a big horde list that's going to be running towards you, there's no reason not to set them up in your deployment zone and get those hurricane bolter shots on the go from turn 1. Try and keep them in cover where possible to give them the lovely 1-up save, and I would start them somewhere in the centre of the battlefield so the opponent can't get too far away from them and just make them redundant by stepping back and outranging them. If you are dropping them in from reserve with Raven Guard, then I would consider dropping them next to an enemy heavy unit, using all of their small arms and hurricane bolters to fry a bunch of light infantry somewhere within 24-inch range, and then try and make the charge on the heavy target and hopefully bring it down in one range of combat. I'd often consider charging with these guys just to provide more mobility, as they can gain a lot more mobility out of a charge than they can out of their 4-inch movement. Overall, with the right buffs applied, I'd say Assault Centurions are now among some of the most competitive units in the whole of 40k, unless Games Workshop decide to nerf the combo of setting them up right outside your enemy's deployment zone with the Master of Ambush Warlord trait, then that could be a game-winning move straight away against a number of armies. And even if the enemy somehow survives all of the anti-infantry and potential massive damage on the charge, they now definitely need to chew through 6 heavily armoured Space Marines before they move on to dealing with the rest of the threats that you've brought in your army. I'm very much looking forward to running these guys in a competitive setting. I may have ordered a box or 2, but I need to get painted up as soon as possible. So thank you very much for listening to another Auspex Tactics video. If I've made any mistakes, or you have any ideas for how to run these guys on the battlefield yourselves, please let us know down in the comments below, and consider subscribing to see more Space Marine unit reviews every week. Next week is going to be mainly focused around the various tracked vehicles of the Adeptus Astartes. Some of their tanks have become very strong in the new update. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.